Everyone, Zeddy here again today with a brand new video, and it's tier list time. And today I'm going to cover one of the tier lists I've been requested the most ever since we did our zero cost card tier list. People have wanted me to take a look at every 10 cost card in Hearthstone history because, well, 10 is one of the most expensive mana costs you can possibly get. That's the most mana you can have in a turn. There are cards that cost more than 10 you can discount. Maybe I'll be a tier list another day. But today we're going to take a look at every single 10 cost card in Hearthstone history. Of course, as always, let me know in the comments below what tier list should we cover next time, and maybe I will take your suggestions. So let's take a look at every 10 cost card in Hearthstone history. We'll be rating it from S to F, S being a god tier auto-include card, and F being basically unplayable garbage you wouldn't even want to take in arenas. Let's start with Anything Can Happen Paladin spell. It's 10 mana. Summon 7 Murlocs that died this game. So that can be any Murlocs, whether it be friendly or enemy Murlocs. If your opponent's playing Murlocs, that could screw you over. But it basically created its own deck when it came out in called Anything Paladin. And basically the build around was that you ran 2 Bluegill Warriors, you ran 2 Murloc War Leaders, you ran Old Murkai, and the objective is you play them all and then you resummon them and just get an insane amount of burst damage. Bringing back Old Murkais and Bluegills is just incredibly powerful. And basically during its entire run in Standard, Anything Paladin was a realistic deck. Even after Old Murkai was Hall of Famed in like the original Standard rotation, they put Old Murkai in there, but still just the 2 Bluegills, the 2 War Leaders really were strong, and you had things like Finja. And we've seen this deck evolve throughout the years. It's still playable, it's still pretty decent and wild, mainly due to the cards like Prismatic Lens that let you cheat out, like Tip the Scales, and Anything Can Happen very early on in the game, allowing for ridiculous burst combos. And yeah, it's just a really powerful card. One of my favorite cards of all time. I played a lot of the old school Anything Paladin. It's like a control combo deck. And still, like I said, it still sees play today. Really strong card, really sweet. I mean, the art itself is cool. You have like 6 Murlocs on the screen, and the whole, I think the flavor text is, the 7th one is holding the camera. It's beautiful. I'm going to give it an A. It's not quite an S tier card, but it has seen a lot of play throughout the years, and it's just a really, really sick card. Next, we have Aviana. It's a Druid legendary. Used to be 9 mana, but now she is 10. And what she is, a 5/5, and she will make your minions cost 1. And it's a staple in like every combo Druid deck ever, basically, since Kun was made. Because, yeah, you can go Aviana, Innervate Kun, or Lightning Bloom Kun, Coin Bloom, whatever, and you cheat out whatever combo you want, whether it be Malagos Druid, Togwoggle Druid. You can do all sorts of memes, like we talked about the other day in our meme card review, like getting a bunch of Major Domos or whatever, automatons. Silliness can prevail, and Aviana enables so many different things. An incredibly powerful card. S tier for sure at 9, and at 10... you know what? She's still the cornerstone of so many good combo Druid decks that just don't ever go away, especially with cards like Juicy Psych Melon, enabling you to draw her out, and like Geppetto, getting her for 1 mana. She's just too freaking good. I gotta give her an S. She's still super relevant in the wild metagame, despite the fact she costs 10, so S for me, but definitely not the highest of S's you can get. Next we have Big Bad Archmage. This is a 10 mana 6/6 neutral epic minion. At the end of your turn, summon a random 6 cost minion, and this card is not that great. It's a 10 mana 6/6, so the stat line is bad, right? And you can get some random 6 drops, but for the most part, 6 drops are not that great. Big Bad Archmage mostly saw play, from what I recall, in like a big Shaman deck, because you could like Muck Morpher this out, you could Eureka it out, things like that, but basically as better cards have been made, well, like a couple we'll talk about later on in this list, this card just doesn't see play in that archetype. That archetype wasn't exactly very good with the Big Bad Archmage build. This card doesn't really see much play in Standard Wild. I actually thought this was only Wild, because I literally just never see this card see play. It's just not that great. It's just 6 drops suck, the body's not great. I'll give it a C. It has seen play, but overall it definitely leaves a lot to be desired. Next we have the Warlock Death Knight Bloodreaver Gul'dan. Do I really need to say anything about this card? It's one of the best Death Knights ever, if not the best Death Knight ever. Resummon your demons, get an insane hero power that deals 3 damage and gives you lifesteal. It's just ridiculous. It's an amazing card. It's S tier all the way. We know it's great. Let's not go too far in that road. Next, we have Mecha'thun, one of the old gods. It's a 10-mana 6/6, and the battle cry was it deals damage equal to its attack, split randomly amongst all enemies, and you can buff it up, like all your Mecha'thun enabler cards. But for the most part, Mecha'thun wasn't that great. It's probably the worst of the old gods today. It's just slow to buff it up. The damage output is not fantastic. Like, just the game has evolved so much that random damage split, even if this is like a 20 or 30 attack minion somehow, it's still not that great. It's crazy how things have changed. It did see a decent amount of play when it came out, especially with like Mecha'thun Warrior. Mecha'thun Warrior was quite popular, but overall, not really that good of an old god anymore. Hasn't seen realistic competitive play in Wild for like as long as I can remember. Probably ever, period. And in Standard, it fell out pretty quickly. It didn't last in the meta for very long. So I'll give it a C. It's just not quite there. But, I mean, Mecha'thun is a wicked cool card. And the arc, like, everything about it's really fun. It's just not good enough. And that makes me quite sad. Next, we have Colossus of the Moon. This is a 10-mana 10/10 Divine Shield Reborn neutral legendary that Rogue gets a lot from Pharaoh Cat. And you also put it in big decks. It's really good in like a big Shaman deck. You can play it even in big Priest if you're going Ultra Greed, but outside of that, it doesn't see a heck of a lot of play. It's quite often a bad Pharaoh Cat card because it's so expensive, but yeah, I mean, it's a really hard minion to remove depending on your class. Like, you're a warrior, good luck removing it. It's brutal. But for the most part, just hasn't seen a ton of competitive play outside of the big decks, whether it be like Darkest Hour Warlock or, like I said, big Shaman. But again, it's not horrendously bad, and it still pops up in meta decks that are relatively competitive in Wild. Not so much Standard right now, but definitely in Wild and big Shaman. So I will give it a B. It's on the very low end of the B side, but yeah, it does pop up, and exactly not the worst card in the world, especially when you get it randomly. Depending on the right matchup, it can be quite good. Next, we have the OG Dragon Deathwing, 10-mana 12/12 in Battlecry. You discard all of your cards, you destroy every minion on the board. It's the ultimate board clear, an insanely, disgustingly satisfying animation that they've added to it. It looks amazing golden, it's a super cool card, and it's unplayable because it's a 10-mana board clear that leaves you with no card advantage, and almost every single deck in the game, in every format, has efficient removal and can deal with a 12/12, and it costs 10. And it makes me sad, because Deathwing is a really amazingly cool card. It has been meta, very, like, off and on throughout the history of Hearthstone. There was a time where you ran Deathwing in, like, it's the Nomi Priest type of deck, because you would just Deathwing and Nomi Priest that couldn't deal with it, yeah, like, especially in Control Warrior. It used to be like the ultimate counter to Rogue at one point, because Rogue basically only ran Sap, so you can't really Sap Deathwing. That doesn't really work so well, so it was good. There was like another Spite Historian pick with Dragon Priest. Because of that, it would help counter Rogue. But yeah, Deathwing just doesn't really pop up realistically these days, and it makes me sad. But for his historical impact, for the fact that he is seen play off and on here and there, I will give him a B. I won't rate him too low. But yeah, Deathwing, not quite the super amazing card that it kind of used to be. Next, we have the other Deathwing, Deathwing Dragonlord, 10-mana 12/12 dragon as well, neutral as well, and it has the Death Rattle, put all dragons from your hand into the battlefield. So this guy was really sick in Big Druid back in the day. I loved playing me some Big Druid. I would play this with Barnes, and I would try and hit my Deathwing Dragonlord and cheat out all my dragons. It was like really good counter to Jade Druid, because I would make bigger men than they would. So I played this back when like Jade Druid was really popular in Standard, and it's been like a staple in like Big Rogue. Especially when that Necrium card was 4 mana, you could cheat out Deathwing Dragonlord on turn 3, pretty much. It was ridiculously powerful in Wild. But outside of that, you don't see it pop up a lot in Wild. It didn't see a ton of play in Standard. It saw some play, but not a ton. But yeah, it pops up in those decks where you cheat them out. Basically, you cheat them out so you can summon an absurd amount of dragons and do some really disgusting stuff. So I'll give it a B for how much it has popped up throughout the years. But again, it's more in those fringe, greedy big decks that aren't exactly top tier, but are competitive and, you know, are pretty fun. Next, we have Dimensional Ripper. It's a 10-mana warrior spell, and it summons 2 copies of a minion in your deck, so it's really good, obviously, in like a big warrior deck. And Big Warrior has popped up in Standard and Wild, off and on, pretty recently in Standard, actually, to try and counter, like, Demon Hunter, because they can't deal with all the big stuff. But overall, it's never, like, top tier. It's never super competitive. And even in Wild, I think Dimensional Ripper, if you're playing Recruit Warrior, I don't even know if you can justify it. You could probably try and fit in a copy, but man, Wild's so aggressive, so fast, and you have decks like Priest that Psychic Scream your stuff and make you sad. But overall, it's a pretty sweet card. It can do some really disgusting stuff. If you hit like Rattlegore, or you hit like the Prime, it's just pretty crazy. But overall, this deck and this archetype hasn't been that consistent, and this card's not exactly the strongest part about it. But I'll give it a low B for that reason. It's still it's popping up in Standard today, and pops up in Wild once in a while. So maybe like a month ago, before before Rattlegore came out, this card would probably be a C, but I feel like it's elevated up to a B in recent times. Next, we have a Warlock spell, 10 mana spell, Doom. You destroy all the minions on the battlefield and you draw a card for each one that has died. Yeah, Warlock doesn't really need this draw, and they have a lot of better AoEs, but Doom has popped up in basically one archetype primarily, and that was Mecha'thun Warlock, because you ran Bloodbloom. You typically ran 2 copies of Bloodbloom to try and get to your combo, and well, you could sacrifice Bloodbloom and 10 health, and yeah, just clear the board and draw a bunch of cards to try and get to your combo. Darkest Hour could run this, but typically didn't, because you don't really want to draw cards in that deck. If you draw a bunch of cards in Darkest Hour, you're going to draw your minions, and then your combo is useless. But yeah, it saw a bit of play in Mecha'thun. It's seen play sometimes in Reno decks, but again, like the draw aspect of it, which you would think is an upside, is typically a downside for Warlock. So I'm going to give it a C. It did pop up basically in one deck, but honestly, it got cut pretty quickly from that archetype as better draw options came along. And it's just, yeah, Warlock just doesn't... Of all the classes that needs a big draw spell for 10 mana, I don't think Warlock really is one of them. Next, we have a 10-mana dragon for Hunter, Emerus. Battlecry, it doubles the attack and health of all minions in your hand. So, the ultimate hand buff card pretty much has always been unplayable in Hunter. It's just, it's too expensive. 10 mana do nothing in Hunter of all classes just does not work. It's a card that felt really good to get off Dragon Queen, Alexstrasza in Wild when they were 0 mana, or still at 1 mana. And I've been watching Mark try and combo with it with his Shutterwalk deck, where he would just try and summon get random dragons from like eggs or bone drakes to get Shutterwalk to buff it up. Plus, he pulled it off. Check his latest YouTube video out, or one of his latest YouTube videos out for that. But yeah, overall, Emerus pretty much unplayable in Hunter throughout its entire run. The effect is potentially powerful, but it has never seen any competitive meta play whatsoever. It's a meme. I'm sorry, Emerus. You're an F. It pains me, but you're an F. You're just unplayable. Even though your effect's really good, you can't see play. It's sad, but whatever. Next, we have Eye of the Storm. This is a 10-mana Shaman spell. You summon 3, 5, 6 elementals with Taunt. You overload for 3. So that's 10 mana, 15, 18 in stats of Taunt. That's pretty good, right? Yeah, this card's literally never been played on ladder in terms of competitive decks. It's 10 mana. It's too slow. Like, every deck that's, like, if you're slow enough to live to that point, the decks that can deal with that are going to deal with it. If the decks that can't deal with that, they've already killed you, or you've already won, basically. This is like a created by card for the most part. It's a really sick arena pick. I'll give it that. I thought maybe it would get the light of day with Kalecgos, where you could cheat it out for 0 mana, but it just never saw the light of day in any realistic competitive Shaman deck. But it's a really good card. It just, yeah, it's just that kind of created by option where you just can't really put 10-mana cards in your deck. And it's in Shaman, which is just unplayable. So I'm not going to give it an F, because Emerus, I know it's the same terms of, like, Emerus has never seen competitive play, neither is this card. But I wouldn't even want to take our Emerus in Arena. I can take Eye of the Storm pretty comfortably in Arena, and I could see this card popping up at some point in Shaman, because it's not 10 mana do nothing. It's 10 mana get a lot of taunt. You overload a bunch, but you get a lot of taunt. And that's relevant, so I'm going to give it the lowest of C's, but not quite an F. Next, we have Faceless Behemoth. This is a neutral minion. 10 mana, 10/10. No text. It's a 10-mana 10/10. Why would you ever play this? Ever. It's an F. Like completely. It's a 10-mana 10/10. Yeah. Next we have Frost Giant. It's a 10-mana 8/8 neutral epic, and it costs 1 less for each time you use your hero power this game. So you can run this in like even decks, like your hero powering, and you cheat it out with your even deck. I guess the idea, because this came out during TGT, was, you know, Inspire cards were going to be all the rage. Like, you're going to play all your hero power cards, and then you're going to get 0 cost giants after you've hero powered 10 times. Yeah, it's a little slow, like, compared to cards like Flesh Giant and things like that. It's a little slow, and it kind of popped up in maybe even decks you could play it, right? But other than that, Frost Giant really didn't see a heck of a lot of play, but you could eventually cheat it out, and it's alright. You could Conjurer's Calling and even Mage. It's pretty good. But overall, yeah, Frost Giant, not a ton of play, and just basically created the meme of, well, you better not float a hero power because you never know when you get a random Frost Giant in your hand. I'm going to give it a low C. It did see some ladder play in some of these hero power decks, but overall, for the most part, they're not really that good, or nor have they ever been that good. Next, we have Hakkar, the Soul Flayer. This is a neutral 10-mana legendary. It's a 9/6, so pretty rough stats. And Death Rattle, shuffle a Corrupted Blood in each player's deck. And a Corrupted Blood is a 1-mana spell. When you draw it, it deals 3 damage to you, or to the hero that draws it. And then it shuffles 2 more bloods into your deck. So basically, you keep adding more and more bloods into your deck, and like, why would you run in this? And it's both players, by the way. Both players get bloods, not just yourself. So, the idea behind this deck is it could screw with stuff. It could screw with, like, Reno cards. Like, oh, well, they can't Highlander me if they have multiple bloods in their deck. It's a counter to Mecha'thun. And you could do stuff with, like, Skulking Geist to screw your opponent over. Like, what you could do is you could play Archivist Elysiana and, like, Geist and, you know, just do stuff to not have the bloods in your opponent as a bloods and die. But my favorite combo with Hakkar was Togwoggle, Hakkar Druid. You would basically have a Hakkar on the board, it would die, and you would get the bloods, and then you would have no cards left in your deck. You would just have bloods. You Togwoggle, naturalize, your opponent's dead. Because that amount of damage escalates so quickly. And I love that deck. It was really fun. I played it a lot. It was a great counter to Shivala Paladin, because they could time out, and it was amazing. They would time out, and then I would just put bloods in their deck, and then I would naturalize them, and it would just go on and on and on. They wouldn't take any damage because of the timeout, but once their turn started, then they would draw the bloods, and they would take like hundreds of damage, and it was awesome. But overall, yeah, Hakkar's seen a lot of play. You could play it in, like, even, I've seen it in, like, Res Priests, Quest Priests, to, like, because, well, they don't draw cards and other decks do, and you just res Hakkar and kill your opponent. You're healing up anyway, so. Card saw a lot of play. For a card that seems so weird and fringe, it saw a decent amount of play in both Standard and Wild, to the point where I'm actually going to give this a low A. It's popped up in so many decks. It's such an interestingly designed card that I'm going to give it the lowest of A's. It's probably me overrating it because I really like the card, but, I mean, it's popped up in, I can think of at least 5 to 10 decks, so I gotta give it a little bit of credit, and a lot of those were relatively competitive. Next we have Jumbo Imp. It's a 10-mana demon for Warlock. It's an 8/8, and it costs 1 less whenever a friendly demon dies. Well, this is in your hand, so you have to have it in your hand, and, well, that kind of kills the card pretty quickly. Yeah, it's just never seen play in Zoo. You'd think with all the demons they run, even like Galakron Warlock, where you would summon all these 1/1 imps all the time. It's never seen realistic competitive play. Again, it's kind of in that Frost Giant territory, but it's not exactly terrible. It's a card you could put in your deck, and it could be okay-ish. There's just always better options for the most part, so I'll give it a low C. It's not complete garbage, but again, it's rarely popped up in decks for Warlock, and it's more a card you get off your Galakron than Warlock, basically. Next we have Kalecgos, 10-mana mage, legendary dragon. Your first spell this turn costs 0, and Battlecry you discover a spell. Insanely good. We went over this card pretty recently on another tier list, and it's just as good in the 10-mana spot in terms of 10-mana cards. Absolutely S tier. It's been in, like, Reno mages, all these greedy mages, any mage that wants to go to the late game whatsoever. unless it's like some kind of combo deck, is going to run Kalecgos. It's incredibly powerful, just does a lot of good stuff. Talked a lot about it. Kalecgos is definitely an S tier card. So we have King Pharos. It's a 10 mana 5/5 legendary, neutral legendary battle cry. For each spell in your hand, summon a random minion of the same cost. So if you're running a lot of expensive cards, particularly spells, obviously, you're going to want to run this card a lot of the time. Like we've seen in Jade Druid, we've seen it in Quest Druid, we've seen like some like bigger spell decks like Mage, and it's been a decent card in those decks. It's popped up a lot. It is recent as this meta in both Standard and Wild, as in the aforementioned Jade Druid and Quest Druid, and it's not a bad card. Just getting that giant stat bomb can be really good. The minion pool, on average, can be really bad, but it doesn't really matter when you just get a million stats that your opponent cannot answer. And if you're playing a deck like Druid, you ramp it up and get it out pretty early. It can do some ridiculous stuff. I'm going to give it a low A. It's popped up in a lot of decks throughout its run. I think it's not one of like the best cards out there, but again, it's just always popping up, so I got to give it its due. Next, we have Kun. It's a 10 mana 7/7 for Druid legendary minion. You get to choose one card. You either gain 10 armor or you refresh your mana crystals. And, well, I mentioned Aviana earlier. We'll put it with Aviana. This card is a staple in those combo decks. Or if you're just running it, like Quest Druid. We've seen it in Quest Druid when it got brought back to Standard in the Doom of the Tomb event. It was pretty good there. You went like infinite with Kuns and Baleful Bankers and silliness like that. Was pretty sweet there. Hell, you can just run it in like a Spiteful deck just as a 10 mana or a 0 mana 7/7, right? You get to play it for free. Just a really incredibly powerful card that has basically seen play in Druid since its inception. It's just insanely powerful, so I gotta give it an S. Next, we have Living Monument. It's a 10 mana 10/10 neutral minion. This time, unlike Faceless Behemoth, it has Taunt. Wow. Still an F. And it dies to the Black Knight, so maybe it's even worse, you know? For the most part, it's better. It's Taunt, but still, you're never putting that in your deck. Next, we have Mecha'thun, 10 mana 10/10 neutral mech. Death Rattle, if you have no cards in your deck, hand, and battlefield, destroy the enemy hero. A card that lets you just win the game by destroying it as long as there's nothing in your hand, nothing in your deck, and you're destroying the board. Warlock has been the best at using this, but a lot of other classes have done it. Hell, even Paladin has been able to do it. It's just enabled so many Mecha'thun decks, and, you know, a card that says win the game is incredibly powerful. Druid is probably one of the better classes to have done it as well. Warrior, hell, even Warrior was pretty good in Standard with, like, Boom Ship. You would cheat it out with Malagos, Inner Rages, and Whirlwinds. Kill off your own board. And giving Mecha'thun an S, it's just been a staple. Although it's fallen out of favor lately in Wild because it's just too slow. You know, as more cards are made, this card will always pop back up, and it's been a meta breaker a lot of the time in Standard and Wild. You just gotta give it its due. It's an S tier card. Next, we have Mind Control, 10 mana spell for Priest. You gain control of an enemy minion. It's too expensive. 10 mana, 2 yoink a minion, not great. It's a decent Discover option sometimes. Hell, sometimes it's a good Zephyrus option. It's pretty good in Arena. You like taking in Arena. But for the most part, Mind Control has just not really been a meta card in the Standard game for pretty much forever since it went from 8 to 10. But I'll give it a C. Again, not the worst card in the world. Just something you're not really ever going to put in your deck. Next, we have N'Zoth, the Old God, Battlecry. You resummon all Death Rattle minions that died this game. So, yeah, N'Zoth is insanely powerful. Really good in Warlock, particularly with, like, Void Lords. And, you know, it's got pretty good synergy with Gul'dan. You see it in Mage a lot of the time. We've seen it in Priest. We've seen it in... I mean, any class can realistically run this. It's just... it runs. As long as you got Death Rattles that make sense, it's incredibly powerful. Absolutely S tier. One of the strongest 10 drops ever made, and still sees a ton of play in WoW today. So we have Nagrin Slam as a 10 mana spell for Hunter. You summon 4 3/5 Cleft Hoofs that attack random enemies. So they're beasts, and they get to go face or attack minions, and it's pretty good. It's pretty solid. Saw a little bit of play in Highlander Hunter last expansion. Highlander Hunter's gotten a lot more aggressive now with better aggressive options, but you can still run that in that deck. And there's options to play this in Wild and like Spiteful Hunter, which isn't great, but not the worst in the world, and has pretty good synergies with Zul'jin. I'm going to give it a B. It's a pretty good card. It just doesn't really fit into any top tier deck lately, but it definitely pops up a lot more than you think, and it's just solid. It's 10 mana, what, 12, 20? in stats, and it's all proactive. It does stuff, so it's really strong. Next, we have Nazari, 10 mana 4/12 dragon for paladin. Battlecry, restore both heroes to full health. I mean, it's a good dragon queen option when you need to heal up when you're dead. You typically never run this in paladin unless you're trying some jank big paladin, I guess. But overall, not great. I'll give it a C. It's Reno for 10, but ugh. It's 10 mana, very slow, not that great. We have the puzzle box of Yogg Saron, mage spell, 10 mana, cast 10 random spells, targets chosen randomly. Random! Well, we all know how I feel about this card. Not one of my most favorites. It's really powerful, it's very strong. You can play it in like Reno Mage, you play it a lot of different decks, and you get it randomly. Can be insane. Very powerful, but not meta warping, not meta defining, especially with the nerf to Dragoncaster. Just those decks aren't as reliable. You typically don't ever play this card in Wild too, because the spell pool is pretty unreliable. I'll give it an A, not quite S tier, but yeah, Puzzle Box is definitely very strong and very random. Next we have Pyroblast, 10 mana spell for Mage, 10 mana, deal 10 damage. Pretty good burn spell, not amazing, pretty good. I've seen play in like Gunther Mage back in the day, burn mages, freeze mages, the Naga Sandwich deck. You would cheat it down to 5 mana. You could play 2 of them in 1 turn. That was pretty good. I'm gonna give it a B. It pops up in Mage here and there. It's just a good burn option, and Zephrys loves it. You get your opponent down to 10. He'll usually give you Pyro for next turn, and that's a pretty solid option. We have Scrapyard Colossus. This is a 10 mana neutral minion elemental. It has taunt and death rattle. It summons another 7/7 with taunt. Staple like Big Shaman, Big Priest can run this. Just any deck that can cheat out a big minion. Love some Scrapyard Colossus because it's a taunt into taunt, and then it's incredibly valuable to keep yourself alive when you're cheating out minions. And then if you can give it like further stuff, like further death rattle to resummon it, absolutely crazy. Doesn't see a ton of play in standard, but in Wild, very prevalent. Multiple big decks. I'm gonna give it a low A for like how good it is in those decks, and will continue to be. And as more big decks get support, that card will only get better. Next we have Sea Giant, 10 mana 8/8 neutral giant, and it costs 1 less for each other minion on the battlefield. So like staple in like a lot of zoo decks. We saw Naga Giant back in the day, and Warlock and Hunter. It's just a staple. It's just a good giant because it's not that hard to get to be too cheap. You see it in even Shaman and Wild still, because it quite often costs like 1, 2, 0 mana. It's incredibly powerful. Cheating out 8/8s has always been really good, and so is this card. I'm going to give it an S. It's popped up in way too many decks throughout the years, and it's an incredibly powerful giant. Probably the most powerful giant out of them all, except maybe for Mountain Giant. Next we have a Druid spell, 10 mana, it's Survival the Fittest, and you give all of your minions in the deck and the battlefield in your hand, +4/+4. It was really good when, Kalecgos was unnerfed, and even with it being nerfed, it's still good. You still can play it in standard. You don't really see it in Wild, although I've seen experimentation with it in Wild. Survival the Fittest is a pretty good card to buff your stuff, but it's only as good as the stuff that gets you to it. You need the ramp, you need the survivability, and well, Guardian Animal's been nerfed. You don't see it a heck of a lot in Standard anymore, but it's a solid card. It's definitely good in that deck, but it never really has carried a deck. I'm going to give it a B. I don't think it's an A. It's just a solid buff card, but again, does not carry those decks in my opinion. Next we have a 10 mana mage hero card, the Amazing Reno. Battlecry, make all minions disappear. Poof, really strong hero card. We went over this pretty recently, and yeah, I'm going to say the same thing. It's a really good board clear. The hero power is really stupid and random. It can be really frustrating. It can cost you games. Sometimes it can scam, but overall, it's more of a detriment than anything. But the most powerful board clear ever created, and is a very solid card. I'll give it an A, but again, it's only like a staple in like, the really slow mage decks, and even in Wild, a lot of them don't even run this card. It's too slow even for there. Next, we have the Boom Reaver Warrior Legendary. It's a 10 mana 7/9 in Battlecry. You summon a copy of a minion from your deck and give it Rush. This has never, at least in my recollection, ever been run in Warrior. Any competitive deck, it was more like a delivery drone or a mega assembly option that you would get when you would play, Control Warrior with Dr. Boom, and this would get Rush itself, so that was pretty good. It wouldn't fatigue you because it's a copy. Again, it's one of those cards that isn't terrible, but not that bad. But for the most part, if I'm going to give Emrys an F, I'm going to give this card an F too. Never been competitive. It is proactive in a way. You do cheat out a minion, but overall, even Big Warrior doesn't really want anything to do with that card. Next we have Tarantus. This is a Druid legendary, 10-mana 12/12, and it cannot be targeted by spells or hero powers. So this was really good in the Druid mirror back in the day because Druid cannot deal with this stuff like at all. Like the only way they could ever remove something is by targeting it, like Naturalize or Mulch or something. And you would play this and you would screw a Druid opponent, or you'd like Control Warrior would really struggle for the most part unless they want to brawl. So this was like a great option in Druid. You could cheat it out in like a big Druid deck maybe, but overall Tarantus wasn't really ever meta. It was a great option in some matchups, but even there it wasn't fantastic. I'll give it a C though. It popped up, it saw a little bit of play, but overall not that great. Next we have the Druid spell, Ultimate Infestation, 10 mana, you draw 5 cards, deal 5 damage, gain 5 armor. Summon a 5/5. S tier, ridiculous. One of the best value cards ever in Hearthstone. Still sees play, plenty of play in Wild. It was even good in like Spiteful Druid, Jade Druid, like just so many Druid decks. Malga, like it's insane. It's insane. S tier all the way. Ridiculously powerful spell. Next we have Ultrasaur. It's a 10 mana neutral 7/14 beast. It dies to Meteor, so it's an F tier minion. Just why would you play this? It dies to Meteor. Came out in the same set. What were they thinking? Next we have Vagrant Rin, 10 mana 7/7, legendary minion for warrior. You draw 3 cards, and if it's a minion, you summon it onto the battlefield. People thought this card would be really good, but it turns out Control Warrior didn't love it because it would fatigue you. A lot of your minions were like battle cries, so that wasn't too phenomenal. But it's pretty cool in like a big warrior deck where you cheat out a bunch of stuff. And you know, drawing 3 cards can be pretty good, but it's 10 mana, really expensive. It saw fringe play in like some tempo-ish warrior decks, but for the most part, Vagrant just was not good enough. Next we have another old god, Yasharaj, 10 mana 10/10, and it summons a minion from your deck onto the battlefield. Staple, Big Priest, any deck where Barnes would be like, Barnes and Yasharaj were like the only minions in your deck. Incredibly powerful in those decks. It's popped up in too many big decks that just scam. I got it. I don't want to give it an S. I can't. But this one's a tough one. I'm actually struggling where to put it. So I'm going to give it a high A because it's only been in like those big archetypes. But there's so many. It's been in so many scam decks that I'll put it as a very low S. Fine. I'll compromise with myself. This one just pains me because, yeah, it's popped up in like Big Priest, Spell Hunter, Renounce Warlock. So many of these stupid decks that only ran Barnes and Yasharaj are a big deck like Big Shaman, Big Priest. Too many stupid decks. Hell, my old God's Quest Druid loved it. It was stupid. I'll give it a low S. Probably overrating it. I don't know. I'm torn. Let me know in the comments. Next, we have the last old god, Yogg Saron. 10 mana 7/5, Battlecry, summon random spell. For every spell you cast this game, target's chosen randomly. It was nerfed. It was unnerfed. It's ridiculous. It was meta. It was crazy. It's an S tier card. And it's a god tier meme card as well. All around, Yogg has probably stolen almost as much games as any card in the history of Hearthstone. And yeah, just incredibly impactful, stupid, create more highlights than anything. I'll give it an S, absolutely. And last, we have a Hunter hero card in Zul'jin. It's 10 mana. You cast all of the spells you cast this game, targets chosen randomly. Really good in a multitude of Hunter decks like Spell Hunter, Reno Hunter, just mid-range Hunter with Dire Frenzy. Really good value, very powerful card. Won't give it quite an S. It's kind of that Amazing Reno territory where, you know, the aggressive archetypes don't want to run it. It's definitely in a niche category, and a lot of those have fallen off, especially in Wild. You don't see a lot of Zul'jin these days, but I'll definitely give it an A. And there you have it. That's every 10-cost card in the history of Hearthstone. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. Have a great day. Stay salty, my friends.